What if every time you called an Uber, instead of taking you to your destination, the driver insisted on driving you to the scene of a crime you had committed? Not one you were about to commit, but one from your past that you thought no one knew about. In November 2023, Detective Sarah Kim received the most bizarre series of police reports in her 15-year career, multiple passengers claiming that the same Uber driver had kidnapped them and forced them to confront crimes they had never reported to anyone. The first call came at 2:17 a.m. from Jennifer Walsh, a 34-year-old marketing executive who had requested a ride home from a business dinner in downtown Seattle. Instead of driving her to her Capitol Hill apartment, the driver had taken her to a parking garage in Belltown and refused to let her out until she confessed to the hit-and-run accident she had committed 3 years earlier. "He knew everything," Jennifer told Detective Kim, her hands shaking as she gave her statement. "He knew about the cyclist I hit on Pine Street in 2020. I never stopped, never reported it, never told anyone. The cyclist was fine. I saw him get up and walk away, but I was drunk and scared and I just kept driving. But this driver, he had photos of my car at the scene. He knew the exact time and location, and he wouldn't let me out of the car until I admitted what I had done." The driver, according to Jennifer's account, had introduced himself only as Marcus. He appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm, knowing eyes that suggested he had seen everything the world had to offer. His Uber profile showed a 4.9-star rating with over 10,000 completed rides, but when Detective Kim tried to contact him through the app, his profile had mysteriously disappeared. The second incident occurred just 4 days later. Robert Hayes, a 41-year-old real estate developer, had called an Uber to take him from SeaTac Airport to his Bellevue office after returning from a business trip to Portland. Instead, the same driver, matching Jennifer's description of Marcus exactly, had driven him to a construction site in South Seattle where Robert had been involved in a bribery scheme 5 years earlier. "He took me right to the exact building where I had paid off the building inspector," Robert told Detective Kim, "a transaction I had never documented, never reported to the IRS, and never told my business partners about. But this driver knew the amount of money, the date of the meeting, even what I was wearing that day. He said he wouldn't take me to my destination until I called the authorities and confessed to the bribery." What made these cases particularly disturbing was that both passengers had eventually complied with the driver's demands. Jennifer had called the police from the parking garage and reported her hit-and-run accident, providing details that allowed investigators to close a 3-year-old case. Robert had contacted the FBI's corruption hotline and provided information that led to the arrest of the building inspector he had bribed. Detective Kim initially assumed she was dealing with an elaborate blackmail scheme, but the cases didn't fit typical extortion patterns. The driver wasn't demanding money or other compensation. He was compelling people to confess to crimes and face the consequences of their actions. Most puzzling was how he could possibly know about unreported crimes with such precise detail. The third case provided the first clue about Marcus's true nature. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a 52-year-old emergency room physician, had requested an Uber to take her from Seattle Children's Hospital to her home in Queen Anne after a particularly difficult shift. Instead, Marcus had driven her to a pharmacy in Wallingford, where she had been stealing prescription medications for her own addiction for over 2 years. "He didn't just know about the thefts," Dr. Morrison told Detective Kim. "He knew about my addiction, my failed attempts to quit, the patients I had endangered by working while impaired. But more than that, he seemed to understand why I had started stealing drugs in the first place. The chronic pain from my car accident, the pressure to keep working despite my condition, the shame that kept me from seeking help." What distinguished Marcus from a typical blackmailer was his apparent compassion for the people he confronted. According to Dr. Morrison, he had spent over an hour talking with her about addiction recovery and the importance of seeking treatment. He had provided her with information about rehabilitation programs and had offered to drive her directly to a treatment facility if she was ready to admit herself. "He wasn't trying to punish me," Dr. Morrison explained. "He was trying to help me face something I had been avoiding for years. The stealing had been eating away at me, and I knew I needed help, but I was too scared and ashamed to ask for it. Somehow, he gave me the courage to do what I should have done months ago." Detective Kim's investigation into Marcus revealed something that defied explanation. According to Uber's records, there was no driver by that name registered with the company. The car descriptions provided by passengers matched different vehicles each time: a black Honda Civic, a gray Toyota Camry, a blue Nissan Altima, but none of the license plates could be traced to actual registered vehicles. More disturbing was the discovery that Marcus seemed to appear only to passengers who were carrying the weight of unconfessed crimes. Detective Kim interviewed dozens of regular Uber users who had never encountered him, despite using the service frequently in the same areas where the confrontations had occurred. Marcus seemed to selectively target individuals who were harboring specific types of guilt. The fourth case provided Detective Kim with her first direct encounter with the mysterious driver. David Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer, had contacted police while still in Marcus's vehicle, using his phone to report that he was being held against his will. Detective Kim responded to the call and found the car parked outside apartment building in the International District. When she approached the vehicle, she found David in the passenger seat, visibly distressed but unharmed. In the driver's seat was Marcus, exactly as the previous passengers had described him. But when Detective Kim ran his identification, she discovered something impossible. Marcus Thompson had died in a car accident 6 months earlier. "You must be Detective Kim," Marcus said calmly as she approached the car. "I've been expecting you." David here has been carrying around some guilt about his involvement in a cyberbullying case that led to a teenager's suicide attempt. He was one of several people who created fake social media accounts to harass a classmate, but he never came forward when the victim was hospitalized. Detective Kim found herself in a situation that challenged everything she understood about criminal investigation. She was speaking with someone who was supposedly dead, who knew details about crimes that had never been reported, and who seemed to be operating as some kind of supernatural force for justice and confession. David Chen's case proved to be accurate in every detail. The cyberbullying incident had occurred 4 years earlier at his high school, and his participation had been kept secret from authorities and his family. Marcus had photos and digital evidence of David's involvement that would have been impossible for anyone else to obtain. "I've been having nightmares about it for years," David told Detective Kim. "I knew what we did was wrong, and when I heard that the kid tried to kill himself, I wanted to come forward, but I was scared of the legal consequences and what my parents would think. I've been living with this guilt ever since, and it's been destroying my life." Detective Kim realized she was dealing with something beyond conventional law enforcement. Marcus appeared to be some kind of supernatural entity, possibly the ghost of the real Marcus Thompson, who was using his former profession as an Uber driver to help people confront their unresolved guilt and seek redemption for past crimes. Her investigation into the real Marcus Thompson revealed a man who had spent his life trying to help others find peace with their past mistakes. He had been a social worker before becoming an Uber driver, specializing in working with ex-offenders and helping them reintegrate into society. His Uber driving had been a second career after retirement, but according to friends and family, he had often gone out of his way to help passengers who seemed troubled or in need of guidance. Marcus always said that everyone deserves a chance to make things right, his widow, Ellen Thompson, told Detective Kim. He believed that people were fundamentally good, but that sometimes they needed help finding the courage to face their mistakes and seek forgiveness. Even when he was driving for Uber, he would sometimes spend extra time with passengers who seemed like they needed someone to talk to. The circumstances of Marcus's death added another layer of mystery to the case. He had been killed in a car accident while rushing to help a passenger who had called him in distress. The passenger, a young woman named Lisa Rodriguez, had been contemplating suicide and had reached out to Marcus because she felt he was the only person who would understand her situation. Marcus had died trying to reach her in time to provide help. Lisa Rodriguez had been saved by another passerby and had gone on to seek treatment for her depression and suicidal ideation. She had never learned that Marcus had died trying to help her, but Detective Kim's investigation revealed that Marcus's final act had been consistent with his lifelong commitment to helping people find redemption and healing. The supernatural Marcus seemed to be continuing this work from beyond death, using his knowledge of people's secret crimes to help them find the courage to confess and seek forgiveness. But his methods raised complex questions about justice, privacy, and the nature of redemption that Detective Kim was not equipped to answer. The fifth case brought these ethical dilemmas into sharp focus. Amanda Rodriguez, a 39-year-old nurse, was confronted by Marcus about her role in a patient's death 3 years earlier. She had made a medication error that had contributed to an elderly patient's death but had covered up her mistake by altering medical records and letting another nurse take the blame. "He knew exactly what I had done and how I had covered it up," Amanda told Detective Kim, "but he also knew how much guilt I had been carrying and how it had affected my ability to do my job properly. He said that my guilt was putting current patients at risk because I was second-guessing myself constantly and making more mistakes as a result." Marcus had driven Amanda to the hospital where the incident had occurred and had given her a choice: confess to the medical board and accept the consequences of her actions, or continue living with the guilt and risk harming more patients through her compromised performance. Amanda had chosen to confess, resulting in the suspension of her nursing license but also the exoneration of the nurse who had been wrongly blamed for the death. The case highlighted the complex moral issues surrounding Marcus's supernatural intervention. While his actions led to justice for wrongly accused individuals and helped guilty parties find redemption, they also violated fundamental principles of privacy and due process. Marcus was essentially forcing people to confess to crimes based on knowledge that would be inadmissible in any legal proceeding. Detective Kim consulted with legal experts, psychologists, and theologians to understand the implications of Marcus's activities. The consensus was that while his intentions appeared benevolent, his methods raised serious concerns about coercion and the right to remain silent. Some argued that supernatural intervention in criminal justice could set dangerous precedents for circumventing legal protections. Others, however, pointed to the positive outcomes of Marcus's interventions. Every person he had confronted had ultimately expressed gratitude for being forced to face their past mistakes and seek redemption. Many reported that confessing had lifted a tremendous psychological burden and had allowed them to rebuild their lives on a foundation of honesty and accountability. Dr. Sarah Kim, a psychologist specializing in guilt and trauma, explained to Detective Kim that unresolved guilt could be psychologically devastating and could lead to depression, anxiety, and self-destructive behaviors. Marcus's interventions, while unconventional, appeared to be helping people address psychological issues that traditional therapy might take years to resolve. What Marcus is doing is essentially forced moral inventory, Dr. Kim explained. He's compelling people to confront the parts of their past that they've been trying to avoid or forget. While the methods are unusual, the psychological benefits of confession and accountability are well documented. Many of his victims may actually be better off psychologically after being forced to address their guilt. Detective Kim's investigation continued as more cases emerged. Marcus appeared to have an unlimited knowledge of unreported crimes and an uncanny ability to find the people responsible for them. His interventions ranged from minor offenses like shoplifting and tax evasion to serious crimes like assault and fraud. In each case, Marcus demonstrated the same pattern. He would pick up passengers who had committed unreported crimes, drive them to the scene of their offense, and refuse to complete the ride until they confessed and took steps to make amends. His approach was always compassionate but firm, and he seemed to understand exactly what each person needed to hear to find the courage to face their past. The sixth case involved Michael Torres, a 33-year-old construction worker who had been involved in a workplace accident that had seriously injured a co-worker. Michael had been operating equipment while intoxicated and had caused the accident, but had covered up his condition and allowed the incident to be blamed on equipment failure. Marcus drove Michael to the construction site and spent hours talking with him about responsibility, accountability, and the importance of preventing similar accidents in the future. Michael eventually confessed to his supervisor and the injured coworker, resulting in new safety protocols that would prevent similar incidents and compensation for the injured worker. "He made me realize that my silence wasn't just about protecting myself," Michael told Detective Kim. "It was putting other workers at risk because the real cause of the accident had never been addressed. My guilt was eating me alive, but I was too scared to come forward. Marcus helped me understand that facing the consequences was the only way to make things right." Detective Kim began to see a pattern in Marcus's selections. He didn't seem to target every person who had committed unreported crimes, but rather those who were struggling with guilt and whose silence was causing ongoing harm to themselves or others. His supernatural knowledge allowed him to identify people who were ready for redemption, but needed help finding the courage to take the first step. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Kim herself became one of Marcus's passengers. She had called an Uber after her car broke down while investigating another case, and found herself face to face with the supernatural driver she had been tracking for months. "Detective Kim," Marcus said with a knowing smile as she got into the car, "I've been waiting for this opportunity to speak with you directly. You've been investigating my activities with great thoroughness, but I think you have some unresolved business of your own that we should discuss." Detective Kim realized that Marcus knew about an incident from early in her career when she had planted evidence to ensure the conviction of a suspect she believed was guilty, but against whom she didn't have sufficient legal evidence. The suspect had been convicted and had served 5 years in prison for a crime he had actually committed, but the conviction had been based on falsified evidence. "You knew he was guilty," Marcus said as he drove toward the courthouse where the trial had taken place. But your methods were wrong, and you've been carrying that guilt for 12 years. The man deserved to be convicted, but not through fabricated evidence. Your actions undermine the integrity of the justice system you've dedicated your life to serving. For the first time, Detective Kim experienced firsthand the psychological pressure that Marcus's other passengers had described. She found herself confronting not just her own guilt about the planted evidence, but also her fears about what confession would mean for her career and reputation. I thought I was serving justice, Detective Kim admitted to Marcus. The suspect was a repeat offender who had escaped conviction on technicalities before. I knew he was guilty, and I couldn't bear the thought of him getting away with another crime because of insufficient evidence. Marcus spent the next hour helping Detective Kim understand the difference between justice and vengeance, and the importance of maintaining ethical standards even when pursuing guilty parties. He explained that her guilt had been affecting her work for years, making her second-guess her instincts and undermining her confidence in her abilities as an investigator. True justice requires clean hands, Marcus told her. You can't serve justice through unjust means, no matter how noble your intentions. The system depends on officers like you maintaining the highest ethical standards, even when it means that some guilty people escape punishment. Detective Kim's confession to her superiors resulted in the reopening of the case with the planted evidence. While the suspect remained guilty of the crime, the conviction was overturned, and he was released after serving his sentence. Detective Kim faced suspension and possible criminal charges, but she also experienced the psychological relief that Marcus's other passengers had described. I never realized how much that guilt was weighing on me, Detective Kim reflected after her confession. I had convinced myself that the ends justified the means, but I was living with the knowledge that I had betrayed everything I believed in as a police officer. Marcus helped me understand that integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy, it's about maintaining your principles even when it costs you something important. The investigation into Marcus's supernatural activities ultimately led Detective Kim to a deeper understanding of the nature of justice and redemption. While his methods were unconventional and raised serious legal and ethical questions, his interventions consistently led to positive outcomes for both the guilty parties and the victims of their unreported crimes. Marcus appeared to possess not just supernatural knowledge of people's crimes, but also an intuitive understanding of what each person needed to find peace with their past and move forward constructively. His confrontations were always tailored to the individual's psychological state and readiness for change, suggesting that his supernatural abilities extended beyond mere knowledge to include insight into human nature and motivation. Detective Kim's final report on the Marcus Thompson case concluded that while his activities existed outside the normal bounds of law enforcement, they served important functions that the traditional justice system often failed to address. His interventions helped people find redemption for past mistakes, provided closure for victims of unreported crimes, and prevented future harm by compelling guilty parties to take responsibility for their actions. The report also acknowledged the complex ethical issues raised by supernatural intervention in criminal justice. Marcus's methods involved coercion and violated principles of due process and privacy, but they also led to voluntary confessions and positive outcomes that might never have been achieved through conventional means. The case of Marcus Thompson challenges our understanding of justice, redemption, and the role of law enforcement in society. Detective Kim wrote in her conclusion, "While we cannot endorse vigilante justice, even supernatural vigilante justice, we must recognize that Marcus's interventions have consistently led to positive outcomes for all parties involved. His activities highlight gaps in our traditional approaches to addressing guilt, accountability, and redemption that deserve serious consideration." Marcus continued to appear sporadically to passengers carrying the burden of unreported crimes, but his activities became less frequent as word of his supernatural interventions spread. Some people who knew about his existence began confessing to past crimes preemptively, hoping to avoid a supernatural confrontation, while others took greater care to avoid committing crimes in the first place. The psychological impact of knowing that Marcus might appear to anyone with unresolved guilt created what some researchers termed supernatural deterrence, a phenomenon where the possibility of supernatural intervention influenced behavior in ways that traditional law enforcement could not achieve. Detective Kim's own experience with Marcus had transformed her approach to law enforcement and her understanding of the relationship between justice and redemption. She became an advocate for restorative justice programs that emphasized healing and accountability over punishment, and she worked to develop new approaches to helping people address guilt and seek redemption for past mistakes. The Uber driver who only took people to crime scenes had revealed something profound about human nature and the importance of facing our past mistakes. Marcus's supernatural intervention demonstrated that most people wanted to do the right thing and were capable of finding redemption when given the support and courage to face their guilt. His legacy lived on in the lives of the people he had helped find peace with their past, and in the broader understanding that justice was not just about punishment but about healing, accountability, and the human capacity for moral growth and change. While his methods remained controversial, his impact on individuals and the community was undeniably positive, suggesting that the supernatural realm might have its own forms of wisdom about human nature and redemption that the living world had yet to fully understand. The mysterious driver continued his work in the shadows of Seattle's streets, appearing when needed to help lost souls find their way back to integrity and peace. For those who carried the weight of secret crimes, the possibility of encountering Marcus served as both a warning and a warning that their actions could not remain hidden forever, and a promise that redemption was always possible for those with the courage to face their past and seek forgiveness. In the end, Marcus Thompson had found a way to continue serving others even after death, using his supernatural abilities to provide the kind of compassionate intervention that he had practiced throughout his life. The Uber driver who took people to crime scenes had become an unlikely agent of justice and healing, proving that the human capacity for redemption could transcend even the boundaries between life and death. The mysterious driver continued his work in the shadows of Seattle's streets, appearing when needed to help lost souls find their way back to integrity and peace. For those who carried the weight of secret crimes, the possibility of encountering Marcus served as both a warning and a warning that their actions could not remain hidden forever, and a promise that redemption was always possible for those with the courage to face their past and seek forgiveness. In the end, Marcus Thompson had found a way to continue serving others even after death, using his supernatural abilities to provide the kind of compassionate intervention that he had practiced throughout his life. The Uber driver who took people to crime scenes had become an unlikely agent of justice and healing, proving that the human capacity for redemption could transcend even the boundaries between life and death. As months passed, Detective Kim's investigation evolved from a criminal case into an anthropological study of guilt, confession, and supernatural justice. The Marcus Thompson phenomenon had begun affecting Seattle's criminal landscape in ways that traditional law enforcement had never achieved. Crime rates in the areas where Marcus operated showed measurable decreases, not because of increased policing, but because potential perpetrators were afraid of supernatural consequences. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a criminologist from the University of Washington, joined Detective Kim's research team to study the broader implications of Marcus's interventions. Their collaboration revealed that the supernatural driver's influence extended far beyond his direct encounters with passengers. "We're seeing what we can only describe as a guilt epidemic," Dr. Rodriguez explained during a presentation to the Seattle Police Department. "People who have never encountered Marcus are coming forward to confess to crimes they committed years or even decades ago. The mere possibility of supernatural intervention has triggered a wave of voluntary accountability that's unprecedented in criminological research." The phenomenon had created support groups throughout Seattle for people struggling with unresolved guilt about past crimes. These groups, initially formed by Marcus's former passengers, provided safe spaces for individuals to confess their mistakes and seek guidance about making amends without fear of immediate arrest or judgment. Jennifer Walsh, the marketing executive who had been Marcus's first documented passenger, had become an advocate for restorative justice and had founded the Second Chances Initiative, a nonprofit organization that helped people navigate the process of confessing to past crimes and making reparations to victims. "Marcus taught me that carrying guilt is more destructive than facing consequences," Jennifer explained to Detective Kim during a follow-up interview. "I thought I was protecting myself by keeping my hit-and-run secret, but I was actually destroying myself with guilt and fear. Confessing was terrifying, but it gave me my life back." The Second Chances Initiative had facilitated over 200 voluntary confessions in its first year of operation, leading to the resolution of numerous cold cases and providing closure for victims who had never known what had happened to them. The organization worked with prosecutors to negotiate reduced sentences or alternative penalties for people who came forward voluntarily, recognizing that self-reporting demonstrated genuine remorse and reduced likelihood of reoffending. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the emergency room physician who had been confronted about her prescription drug theft, had completed rehabilitation and had become a spokesperson for healthcare professionals struggling with addiction. Her confession had led to changes in hospital protocols for monitoring controlled substances and providing support for healthcare workers dealing with chronic pain and addiction issues. Marcus saved my life in more ways than one, Dr. Morrison told a medical conference about addiction among healthcare professionals. He forced me to confront an addiction that was killing me slowly and putting my patients at risk. But more than that, he showed me that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. My confession led to treatment, and treatment led to recovery. The supernatural driver's influence had also created unexpected challenges for the criminal justice system. Prosecutors found themselves dealing with an influx of voluntary confessions for crimes that might never have been solved through traditional investigation. While these confessions helped close cold cases, they also raised questions about appropriate sentencing for individuals who demonstrated genuine remorse and had taken responsibility for their actions without being caught. Judge Maria Santos, who had presided over several cases involving Marcus's passengers, had begun advocating for sentencing reforms that recognized voluntary confession and demonstrated rehabilitation as significant mitigating factors. Her courtroom had become a testing ground for restorative justice approaches that emphasized healing and accountability over purely punitive measures. These individuals come before me having already taken the most difficult step, admitting their guilt and seeking to make amends, Judge Santos explained to Detective Kim. Traditional sentencing guidelines don't account for the psychological work they've already done, or the positive impact their confessions have had on victims and communities. We need new approaches that recognize redemption as a valid component of justice. Marcus's interventions had also revealed systematic issues within Seattle's law enforcement and criminal justice systems. The large number of unreported crimes that he had helped bring to light suggested that many victims had lost faith in the system's ability to deliver justice, while many perpetrators had assumed they could avoid consequences for their actions. Police Chief Robert Hayes initiated a comprehensive review of the department's approach to victim support and crime reporting, working with community organizations to rebuild trust and encourage reporting of crimes that might otherwise go undocumented. Marcus has shown us that there are hundreds of crimes happening in our community that never get reported to police, Chief Hayes acknowledged during a community meeting. That suggests we've failed to create an environment where victims feel comfortable coming forward and where perpetrators believe they'll be held accountable for their actions. The review led to new training programs for officers on trauma-informed victim interaction, expanded victim support services, and community outreach programs designed to rebuild trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities where crime reporting rates were historically low. Detective Kim's research into Marcus's supernatural abilities had attracted attention from paranormal investigators and researchers studying near-death experiences and consciousness after death. Dr. James Mitchell, a neuroscientist studying consciousness and death, collaborated with Detective Kim to document the phenomenon and explore possible explanations for Marcus's supernatural knowledge and abilities. What we're seeing with Marcus challenges our understanding of consciousness and the possibility of existence after death, Dr. Mitchell explained. His knowledge of unreported crimes and his ability to appear selectively to specific individuals suggests a form of consciousness that operates outside normal physical constraints, but maintains access to information and the ability to interact with the physical world. The research team conducted extensive interviews with Marcus's passengers, documenting not just their encounters with the supernatural driver, but also the psychological and spiritual changes they experienced as a result of their confrontations with their past crimes. Many reported that their encounter with Marcus had been a transformative spiritual experience that changed their understanding of morality, accountability, and the interconnectedness of human actions. Some described feeling that Marcus had helped them access a higher level of moral consciousness that allowed them to see their actions from a broader perspective. Meeting Marcus was like having a conversation with my own conscience, explained Robert Hayes, the real estate developer, who had confessed to bribery. He didn't tell me anything I didn't already know deep down, but he helped me find the courage to listen to the part of myself that knew what was right. It was like he gave voice to the moral guidance I had been ignoring. The spiritual dimension of Marcus's interventions attracted attention from religious leaders across Seattle's diverse faith communities. Pastors, rabbis, imams, and other spiritual leaders began incorporating the Marcus phenomenon into their teachings about sin, forgiveness, and redemption. Reverend Sarah Johnson of Seattle's First Baptist Church began offering Marcus workshops, group sessions where people could explore unresolved guilt and find support for making amends for past mistakes without the supernatural intervention. Marcus has reminded our community that confession and accountability are essential for spiritual health, Reverend Johnson explained. While we may not all have supernatural encounters, we all have the opportunity to examine our consciences and seek forgiveness for our failures. Marcus has shown us that redemption is always possible, but it requires courage to face our past honestly. The interfaith community began collaborating on a spiritual accountability initiative that provided counseling and support for people struggling with guilt about past actions. The program combined psychological counseling with spiritual guidance, helping participants understand both the emotional and moral dimensions of guilt and redemption. As the one-year anniversary of Marcus's first documented appearance approached, Detective Kim reflected on how the supernatural driver had changed not just individual lives but the entire community's understanding of justice and redemption. Crime rates in Seattle had dropped significantly, not through increased enforcement, but through increased voluntary accountability and community support for people struggling with guilt and moral conflicts. The city had become a model for restorative justice approaches that other communities began studying and adapting. Marcus has taught us that most people want to do the right thing, Detective Kim wrote in her annual report. They just need support and encouragement to find the courage to face their mistakes and seek redemption. His supernatural intervention was remarkable, but the human capacity for moral growth and change that he revealed was even more extraordinary. The report documented not just Marcus's direct interventions, but also the ripple effects of his work throughout the community. Families had been reunited through confessions that cleared the air about past deceptions. Victims had found closure through learning the truth about crimes committed against them. Communities had become safer through the rehabilitation of people who had taken responsibility for their actions and committed to making positive changes. Marcus's last documented appearance occurred exactly 1 year after his first intervention with Jennifer Walsh. He picked up a passenger named Thomas Kim, a 67-year-old retired teacher who had been struggling with guilt about a student he had failed to protect from abuse 30 years earlier. "I knew something was wrong with that child," Thomas told Marcus during what would be the supernatural driver's final recorded intervention. "I saw the signs of abuse, but I was young and scared and didn't know how to handle the situation. I convinced myself that I was imagining things, and I never reported my suspicions. I found out years later that the abuse continued for months after I could have intervened." Marcus drove Thomas to the elementary school where the incident had occurred and helped him understand that while he couldn't change the past, he could still honor the memory of the student he had failed to protect by working to prevent similar situations in the future. Thomas's confession led to his volunteering with child protection organizations and his development of training programs to help teachers recognize and report signs of abuse. His work potentially prevented other children from experiencing the trauma he had failed to prevent decades earlier. After Thomas's case, Marcus's appearances became increasingly rare until they stopped entirely. Detective Kim theorized that the supernatural driver had accomplished his mission of awakening the community to the importance of accountability and redemption, and that his work was no longer needed in the same form. The infrastructure of support and redemption that had grown up around Marcus's interventions continued to operate and expand even after his disappearances. The Second Chances Initiative grew into a national organization, restorative justice programs became standard practice in Seattle's courts, and the spiritual accountability movement spread to communities across the country. Detective Kim's final report on the Marcus Thompson case concluded that while his supernatural intervention had been extraordinary and unrepeatable, the human capacity for moral growth and redemption that he had revealed was available to everyone willing to face their past honestly and seek to make amends for their mistakes. Marcus showed us that redemption is not just possible but necessary for both individual healing and community health, Detective Kim wrote. His supernatural abilities allowed him to reach people in ways that traditional law enforcement couldn't, but the real miracle was the human response, the courage people found to confess their mistakes, and the commitment they showed to making positive changes in their lives. Years later, Seattle had become known as a city where people took responsibility for their actions and supported each other in seeking redemption for past mistakes. The Marcus Thompson phenomenon had created a culture of accountability and healing that continued to influence how the community approached questions of crime, punishment, and forgiveness. The Uber driver who had taken people to crime scenes had taught an entire city that justice was not just about punishment, but about healing, growth, and the human capacity to become better than their worst actions. His supernatural intervention had lasted only a year, but its impact on individuals and the community continued to grow, proving that the most important changes in human society often began with the courage of individuals to face their past and commit to a better future. In the end, Marcus Thompson had found a way to continue serving his community even after death, using his supernatural abilities to awaken the moral consciousness that already existed within each person he encountered. The true miracle was not his supernatural knowledge or abilities, but his faith in the human capacity for redemption and his commitment to helping people find the courage to become the person they were meant to be. The story of the Uber driver who only took people to crime scenes became a legend that inspired countless individuals to examine their own consciences and seek accountability for their actions. While Marcus himself had returned to whatever realm of existence awaited beyond death, his legacy lived on in every person who found the courage to confess their mistakes, seek forgiveness, and commit to living with greater integrity and compassion.